In this episode, we examine the last minutes of 5 people mauled by grizzly bears. From a graduate student who relied on noise and awareness instead of spray, to an experienced outfitter who carried a rifle but never got the chance to raise it. We begin in Yellowstone National Park, where TikToker Kelsey Vance was mauled by a bear. It was June 14th, 2015, in the backcountry of Yellowstone National Park, Wyoming. Fog clung to the lodgepole pines lining the narrow trail, reducing visibility to less than 30 feet. The ground was soft, muffling footsteps on the muddy path that wound through dense forest 2 miles from the nearest trailhead. Kelsey Vance was 24 years old, a second-year graduate student in wildlife biology from Oregon. She had arrived in Yellowstone several weeks earlier as part of a summer research program studying wolfpack movements. Her assignment that morning was to check remote camera traps positioned along known wolf corridors. Kelsey maintained social media accounts on TikTok and Instagram, where she occasionally posted about her fieldwork. Her accounts had modest followings of friends, family, and classmates, with her videos typically receiving between 200 and 600 views. She posted once or twice per week when she had interesting footage to share from her research work. Kelsey had completed the required bear safety training upon arrival and had hiked alone in grizzly country on prior occasions during undergraduate fieldwork in Montana, both times without incident. Her supervisor had approved solo fieldwork based on her previous experience and completion of all safety protocols. The research program made bear spray available to field researchers, but carrying it was recommended rather than mandatory. Kelsey had declined to check out a canister, relying instead on noise-making and situational awareness techniques that had served her well in the past. She had signed out alone from the research station that morning, writing her planned route and expected return time in the logbook. Her phone was in her jacket pocket. She had posted a brief photo to Instagram that morning from the trailhead, showing the foggy conditions. The area was known for high grizzly activity in early summer, when bears emerged from dens and sows brought cubs down from higher elevations. The Yellowstone grizzly bear is a distinct population of brown bears inhabiting the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Adult females typically weigh between 300 and 400 pounds, while males can exceed 600 pounds. These bears can run at speeds up to 35 miles per hour in short bursts, even through dense forest terrain. Grizzly bears are highly protective of their cubs, particularly during the first 2 years of life. At some point in the morning, Kelsey rounded a sharp bend in the trail where it passed between 2 large boulders covered in wet moss. The path narrowed to less than 4 feet wide, with dense willow thickets on both sides, rising to 6 feet high. Her phone was in her hand. She had been recording short clips of the foggy trail as she walked, capturing footage for content she planned to post later. The grizzly sow was roughly 20 feet ahead on the trail, facing away. 2 cubs were positioned behind Kelsey's location, partially hidden in the willows to her right. Kelsey had walked directly between the mother and her cubs without seeing either party due to the fog and terrain. The sow turned and saw Kelsey. The bear launched forward without vocalization, just immediate explosive movement. Kelsey's hand moved instinctively to her hip, a reflexive defensive gesture, but she carried no bear spray. The phone fell from her other hand into the mud. She raised both arms above her head and shouted, a loud aggressive yell meant to appear larger and more threatening. The bear did not slow. The sow's momentum carried her forward into Kelsey in less than 2 seconds, striking her with both front paws and knocking her backward off the trail with tremendous force. Kelsey landed on her back in the mud just off the trail. The bear was on top of her immediately, its full weight pressing down. The first bite came to Kelsey's head, the bear's jaws closing around her skull. The bear released and bit again, catching Kelsey's neck and right shoulder. The canine teeth penetrated deep into muscle. Kelsey's right arm moved upward in a defensive motion. The bear bit the forearm, breaking both bones. The attack continued for roughly half a minute. The bear struck Kelsey's head repeatedly with her front paws. A final bite came to the face and throat, tearing through soft tissue. The bear stepped back and stood over Kelsey's body for several seconds. The cubs emerged from the willows and moved toward their mother. The sow turned and led both cubs off the trail into the forest, disappearing into the fog within moments. Kelsey's body was discovered later that afternoon when she failed to return and a search was initiated. Staff found her just off the trail near the camera trap location she had been checking. Her day pack remained on her back, undamaged. No food items were present in the pack, and no bear deterrent devices were found at the scene. Her phone was located on the trail where it had fallen, partially embedded in mud. The screen was cracked, but the device remained functional. Investigators extracted data showing she had been recording video when the encounter occurred. The file captured audio of the attack before the recording stopped. Park officials reviewed the footage as part of the investigation and retained it as evidence. The file was never released. The cause of death was determined to be massive head and cranial trauma with severe brain injury. Secondary injuries included extensive damage to the neck, a fractured arm, and deep lacerations to the face and shoulders. Evidence indicated a defensive attack rather than predatory behavior. The bears had not fed on the body or returned to the site. The area was closed immediately. Wildlife officials determined the attack was a surprise encounter with a protective sow and made no attempt to locate or remove the bears. The case was ruled an accidental death resulting from a defensive bear encounter. Kelsey died within seconds of the attack, caught between a mother bear and her cubs in the Yellowstone fog. The following year in Glacier's backcountry, a ranger would discover that not all bears attack to defend. Some attack to feed. It was August 22nd, 2016, in the backcountry of Glacier National Park, Montana. The campsite sat in a small clearing surrounded by subalpine fir and spruce trees, located several miles from the nearest trailhead. Elevation at the site was high enough that the air carried a crisp edge despite the warm day. Deether Hollis was 26 years old, employed as a seasonal ranger for his third summer. He had grown up in Montana, spending his childhood hiking and camping with his family across the state. He was 3 days into a scheduled backcountry rotation, living at remote campsites to maintain ranger presence in high-use areas during peak season. The rotation required rangers to spend 4 consecutive nights in the backcountry, answering hiker questions, monitoring campsite conditions, and providing emergency response if needed. The campsite had no recent reports of bear activity in the logbook. However, the area was known for grizzly habitat, and all backcountry sites carried inherent bear risk. Deether was the only person in this section of the wilderness that night. Glacier Park grizzly bears are part of the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem population. Adult males typically weigh between 400 and 700 pounds, with some individuals exceeding 800 pounds. These bears are highly intelligent, capable of learning and remembering locations where they have found food. They rely heavily on their sense of smell and hearing to navigate and hunt, particularly at night. Just before midnight, Deether woke to the sound of something moving outside his tent. The footsteps were heavy, deliberate, and circling at a distance of roughly 15 feet. He reached for his headlamp but did not turn it on, listening to assess the situation. The footsteps stopped near the tent door. He heard breathing, deep and steady, and identified it as a bear. He remained still, waiting to see if it would leave. The bear moved toward the food storage area and spent several minutes at the bear pole. The food bag remained secure. It returned to circling the tent, repeating this pattern twice more over the following quarter hour. The bear then made contact with the tent. The fabric pushed inward near the door. Deether sat up and shouted, a loud aggressive yell meant to scare the bear away. The bear stepped back, but did not leave. Deether grabbed his bear spray and unzipped the tent door partially. He shined his headlamp outward. The grizzly stood 11 feet away, a large male with a massive head and shoulders. Its eyes reflected the light. It did not retreat. Deether shouted again. The bear took 2 steps forward. Deether discharged the bear spray through the tent opening. The spray created a cloud between him and the bear. The capsaicin began to take effect, causing the bear visible irritation, but the animal's commitment to the situation overrode its discomfort. The bear pushed through the dissipating cloud. The bear hit the tent with full force, collapsing the structure and pinning Deether beneath the fabric and poles. The bear bit through the tent material, catching Deether's left leg just above the knee and crushing bone. Deether screamed and struck at the bear through the tent fabric. The bear dragged him roughly 30 feet into the tree line, pulling him free of the sleeping bag and tent material. The bear released his leg and bit his torso, jaws closing around his ribcage and fracturing multiple ribs. The bear shook its head violently, a motion typical of predatory feeding behavior. Diether's left arm struck the bear's face twice, weak blows that had no effect. The bear caught the arm in its jaws and bit through the forearm. The attack continued for several minutes. Each bite was deliberate and focused. Diether's movements became weaker as blood loss increased, his struggles diminishing until they stopped entirely. The final bites came to his neck and throat. The bear remained with the body for an unknown period. Evidence later suggested it had begun to feed minimally before scraping forest debris over the body, a caching behavior indicating intent to return. Diether failed to make his scheduled radio check-in the following morning. A search team was dispatched and reached his campsite that afternoon. They found the collapsed tent and drag marks leading into the trees. Diether's body was located roughly 90 feet from the tent site, partially covered with forest debris. The cause of death was blood loss from multiple bite wounds, with contributing factors of severe chest injuries and a severed brachial artery. The pattern of injuries was consistent with predatory behavior. Tracks indicated a single large male grizzly, estimated at over 500 pounds. Wildlife officials closed the entire northern zone and initiated an immediate search for the bear. The animal was located and killed 3 days later, 2 miles from the attack site. Genetic analysis confirmed it was the responsible bear. Examination showed the bear was in good physical condition with no signs of disease. The case was ruled a fatal predatory bear attack. The campsite was permanently closed following the incident. Diether's body was dragged into the trees and cached for later. The bear's behavior unmistakable. On Kodiak Island, a hunting guide would learn that when bears reach their largest sizes, even bullets can't stop what hunger drives. It was September 18th, 2014, on Kodiak Island, Alaska. The hunting camp occupied a flat area of tundra and low brush at 1,200 feet elevation, 3 miles from the nearest coastal access point. Ryan Fisher was 28 years old, a commercial fishing deckhand from Washington who worked off-season as a hunting guide assistant. His role involved camp maintenance, meat processing, and assisting the primary guide with clients. Ryan had encountered brown bears multiple times, but had never experienced an aggressive encounter. He carried bear spray and a rifle, standard equipment for guides working in Kodiak bear country. The area was prime brown bear habitat, and the outfitter had used this camp location for 6 seasons, with multiple bear sightings each year. Protocol required constant vigilance around meat, with at least one person present at all times. The primary guide and both clients had hiked out that morning to scout a second hunting area, leaving Ryan alone at camp to finish meat preparation and maintain watch. The Kodiak brown bear is the largest subspecies of grizzly bear, found only on the Kodiak archipelago in Alaska. Adult males commonly weigh between 900 and 1,400 pounds, with exceptional individuals approaching 1,500 pounds. During fall, bears enter hyperphagia, consuming up to 90 pounds of food per day, which significantly heightens their food motivation and drive to compete for and defend food sources. Their sense of smell can detect meat from distances exceeding 5 miles. That afternoon, Ryan was at the meat processing station trimming the final sections of venison when a brown bear emerged from the brush line 40 yards to the north, walking directly toward the meat. Ryan stepped away from the meat toward his rifle, moving slowly to avoid triggering a charge. Ryan reached his rifle and chambered a round. He shouted at the bear. It continued forward, now 25 yards away. He fired a warning shot into the ground in front of the bear. It stopped, raised its head, and looked directly at Ryan. It stood on its hind legs, rising to roughly 9 feet, then dropped back to all fours and charged. Ryan raised the rifle and fired. The shot hit the bear in the chest, but did not stop the charge. Ryan fired again, the second shot striking the bear's shoulder. The bear crashed into him before he could fire a third time. The impact threw Ryan backward into the wooden meat rack. The structure collapsed under the combined weight. The rifle was knocked from his hands, landing several feet away. The bear bit Ryan's chest, its jaws closing around his ribcage. The bite crushed ribs and caused severe internal trauma, making it nearly impossible to draw breath. The bear lifted him partially off the ground, shook him once, then released. Ryan landed on his back among the collapsed rack poles. The bear bit again, catching his left shoulder and upper arm. Bone snapped. The bear's canine teeth penetrated through muscle. Ryan's right hand found the bear spray on his belt. He pulled it free and discharged it directly into the bear's face from less than 2 feet away. The spray hit the bear's eyes and nose with full force. The bear released his arm and stepped back, shaking its head and pawing at its face, clearly affected and in pain. The spray worked. The bear was disoriented and suffering from the capsaicin. But Ryan was already severely injured and unable to escape. The bear remained near the meat, its food aggression still present despite the spray's effects. After several seconds of discomfort, it moved toward Ryan again and bit his head. The skull fractured under the pressure, the bear's jaws covering most of Ryan's head. The bite lasted several seconds before the bear released and stepped back. Ryan was no longer moving. The bear stood over him briefly, then turned its attention to the scattered meat. It picked up one of the game bags and carried it a short distance away, settling down to feed. The guide and clients returned to camp that evening and immediately saw the collapsed meat station and the bear feeding nearby. They retreated and fired multiple shots into the air. The bear left, carrying a portion of the meat. They found Ryan's body among the wreckage. The cause of death was severe chest trauma, with cardiac and pulmonary damage from the initial bites, combined with massive head trauma. Ryan had fired 2 shots, both hitting vital areas, but neither caused immediate incapacitation, given the animal's size and momentum. The bear spray had been deployed effectively and caused significant distress to the bear, but Ryan's injuries prevented escape. The bear was tracked and killed the following day, 1 mile from camp. It was an adult male, weighing approximately 1,180 pounds. Examination confirmed both bullet wounds had penetrated the chest cavity without causing immediate stoppage. The case was ruled a fatal bear attack resulting from food aggression. Ryan had fired twice into the charging bear's chest, but the animal's size and determination proved overwhelming. In Alaska's interior, a gold prospector working alone would discover what happens when you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was July 9th, 2017, in the Denali region of interior Alaska. The midday temperature reached 71 degrees under partly cloudy skies. The terrain consisted of rolling tundra, dotted with willow thickets and scattered spruce trees, with a clear creek running through a shallow valley below the mining trail. Visibility was excellent, extending over a mile across the open landscape. Luke McKenzie was 30 years old, a recreational gold prospector from Colorado, who had traveled to Alaska for a 2-week mining expedition. He had purchased a small claim along a creek known for placer gold deposits and arrived 4 days earlier, hiking in with a heavy pack of equipment. Luke had prospected in Colorado and Montana for 6 years, but this was his first trip to Alaska. His camp sat on a gravel bar 50 feet from the creek, with his mining equipment and sluice box positioned at the water's edge. The area was prime grizzly habitat, particularly in summer, when bears concentrated along waterways. While the creek was too small for salmon runs, it connected to larger waterways downstream and served as a travel corridor for bears moving between feeding areas. Before his trip, Luke had purchased an air horn, but had not invested in bear spray. His primary deterrent strategy was noise from his mining operation and periodic loud shouts to announce his presence. Interior Alaska grizzly bears are smaller than their coastal counterparts, with adult males typically weighing between 400 and 600 pounds. However, they are considered more aggressive due to increased competition for limited food resources. Creek corridors are particularly important travel routes and feeding areas, and bears will defend access to them aggressively. That afternoon, Luke was standing in the creek, bent over his sluice box, shoveling gravel into the upper section. The water ran at mid-calf depth against his waders. The sound of rocks tumbling through the sluice and splashing water filled his immediate environment. He had not looked up from his work in several minutes. The grizzly approached from upstream, walking along the creek bank. It was a large male, estimated at 480 pounds, with dark brown fur and a prominent shoulder hump. It had been traveling downstream along its regular route when it encountered Luke's camp and mining operation. The bear stopped 35 yards upstream and watched Luke work for roughly 20 seconds. The narrow creek channel and Luke's position created a confined situation. Luke did not see the bear and continued shoveling. The bear descended the bank into the creek and began walking downstream through the water. The confined space and Luke's proximity triggered a defensive response. It closed the distance to 20 yards before Luke sensed movement and looked up. Luke dropped his shovel. He had no bear spray, no weapon, nothing but his voice. He shouted at the bear and raised both arms above his head to appear larger. The air horn sat on the rock 10 feet away, useless and out of reach. The bear accelerated into a charge, water splashing as it covered the distance rapidly. Luke backed toward the creek bank, still facing the bear and shouting. When the bear was less than 15 feet away, he turned to run, but slipped on the wet rocks and fell forward into shallow water. The bear reached him as he attempted to stand, his legs scrambling for purchase on the slippery stones. The bear bit Luke's lower back, its jaws closing around his lumbar region. The bite caused severe spinal trauma and crushing injuries. Luke's legs went limp. The bear lifted him partially out of the water, shook him once, and threw him against the creek bank. Luke landed face down in shallow water. The bear bit his upper back and neck, teeth penetrating deep through muscle and bone. Luke's arms moved weakly in an attempt to protect his head. The bear then bit the back of his skull and neck, causing massive trauma. It held the bite for several seconds before releasing. The bear stepped back, stood over Luke briefly, then moved upstream and continued along the creek in its original direction of travel. It disappeared around a bend within minutes. Luke's body was found partially submerged at the bank's edge. His mining equipment remained in place, and the sluice box was still positioned in the water. The cause of death was severe spinal trauma from the initial bite, with contributing factors of massive head and neck injuries and hemorrhaging. No bear deterrent had been deployed. Investigators noted the victim had not been carrying bear spray, which had become increasingly recommended for anyone working alone in remote bear habitat. The case was ruled an accidental death resulting from a surprise defensive bear encounter in a confined space. Luke's attacker had responded to the surprise encounter and continued upstream. In Montana's wilderness, an experienced outfitter would discover that the most dangerous thing in bear country isn't always the bear itself. It was October 3rd, 2013, in the Bob Marshall Wilderness of Montana. Elevation at this location was 6,400 feet, and the first significant snowfall of the season was forecast to arrive within 48 hours. The terrain was steep, with the hunting area situated on a north-facing slope that dropped 800 feet over a half mile. Reed Matheson was 32 years old, a licensed hunting outfitter who had operated in the Bob Marshall Wilderness for 9 years. He had grown up in Montana, learned to hunt from his father, and established his guiding business after working for other outfitters for 5 seasons. Reed was experienced in grizzly country and had encountered bears numerous times, including 3 previous instances where he had successfully backed away without incident, and one occasion where he had fired warning shots to deter a persistent bear near a gut pile. Reed was guiding a client from Texas on a bow hunt for elk. They had been in the wilderness for 4 days, camping at a base location and hiking out each day to hunt different areas. That morning, they had left camp early and hiked 2 miles to a ridge where elk had been bugling the previous evening. The client was 200 yards behind Reed, moving slowly and quietly through the timber. Reed carried a rifle on all hunts, considered adequate for both elk and bear defense. In 2013, bear spray was becoming more common among outfitters, but many experienced Montana guides, Reed included, relied primarily on firearms and situational awareness. The area was prime elk habitat during the rut, and also prime grizzly habitat. Bears in this region were in hyperphagia, the pre-hibernation feeding frenzy, actively seeking high-calorie food sources. Elk carcasses were particularly attractive. The Northern Continental Divide ecosystem grizzly population is one of the largest in the lower 48 states, with adult males typically weighing between 400 and 700 pounds, some exceeding 800 pounds. Grizzly bears will claim and defend food sources aggressively, particularly large carcasses. Once a bear has established a cache, it will remain nearby and defend the food against all threats. A bear on a carcass is often bedded within 50 feet of the kill and may not be visible until a person is dangerously close. The response to an intruder is immediate and violent, with no warning signs or bluff charges. That morning, Reed was moving slowly through a section of forest where trees grew close together, and deadfall created obstacles every few yards. He paused frequently to listen for elk. Reed stepped over a fallen log and immediately smelled something strong and unpleasant. The odor was organic, like rotting meat mixed with a musky animal smell. He stopped and scanned ahead. The elk carcass was 40 feet directly in front of him, partially hidden behind a cluster of small fir trees. It was a cow elk, dead for at least 2 days, based on the smell and condition. She was lying on her side, with the ribcage exposed, opened and fed upon, the internal organs removed. Reed recognized immediately that a bear had claimed the carcass. He began backing away slowly, keeping his eyes forward. His rifle was in his hands at a low ready position. The grizzly stood up from its bed 25 feet to Reed's right, slightly behind his position. The bear had been lying in a depression behind a fallen log, completely invisible until it rose. It was a large male with dark brown fur and a massive head. Its ears were flat against its skull. Reed turned and saw the bear. He did not have time to raise his rifle and acquire a sight picture. The bear charged immediately, covering the distance in less than 2 seconds. The bear struck Reed from the side with both front paws, knocking him off his feet. He landed on his left side, and the rifle fell from his hands. The bear bit his right shoulder, jaws closing around the shoulder joint and upper arm, crushing bone and tearing through muscle. Reed shouted, a loud yell that carried through the forest. The bear released and bit his back, teeth penetrating deep between his shoulder blades, causing catastrophic damage. Reed's legs stopped responding. The bear bit again, catching the back of Reed's neck. The canine teeth drove through muscle and into bone, causing massive trauma. When the bear released, Reed was no longer moving or making sound. The bear stood over him briefly, then returned to the elk carcass and resumed feeding. Reed's client heard the shout and moved quickly toward the sound. He reached the position minutes later, saw the bear on the carcass, and backed away quietly before returning to camp to call for help via satellite phone. A helicopter was dispatched, but could not land due to terrain and tree cover. A ground team reached the location that afternoon and found Reed's body 43 feet from the elk carcass, lying face down in the forest duff. The grizzly was still present on the carcass and had to be hazed away with gunfire before the team could approach. The cause of death was massive trauma to the upper back and neck with severe hemorrhaging and crushing injuries to vital structures. The bear had not fed on Reed's body and showed no interest in him after the attack. His rifle was found 11 feet away, unfired. The case was ruled an accidental death resulting from a surprise encounter with a bear defending a carcass.